I'll just push the record button. So I sent out the SEIE and sheet and the past feasibility questionnaire. I kind of thought we could use those as guides. And so I just thought we'd go through the SEIE one first. And this is one that I took from VCU. This is not one that I developed, so ours would not look exactly like this, but I think you would get the idea. I did update it for 2017, but it's really simple. It's just the month, and you would put in the gross wages that the client earned for the month, and how much of those wages were excluded under the SEIE, and if there was anything remaining left. So let me see if this works. So let's say, for example, you're working with a client who's SEIE and they make $1,000 a month in January. And $1,000 of the entire wages are excluded. And ideally, once you put in the gross wages and how much is excluded, under used year-to-date, that would be carried down. So it would say used year-to-date 1,000, and then the remaining balance would be subtracted to 7,200. So 6,200, I mean. So ideally, you would just take whatever the gross wages were and subtract it from the 7,200, and it would be nice if WorkWorld could automatically calculate how much the client has excluded in the gross wages. And it's not working well on the spreadsheet, but let's say in February they also earned 1,000. So used to date would be carried down 2,000 used to date, and then WorkWorld would be able to calculate they got 5,200 left. I'm just wondering if that would be possible to incorporate something like this into WorkWorld, where it can calculate the remaining exclusion for the user. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a bit different because it's cumulative. You know, basically the way we do it now is that if they do not exclude the maximum amount of earnings, we ask them if they have, reached the exclusion limit of 7,200 or whatever it is. And if not, then we push a text result out saying you need to use more of your SEIE. So we sort of do it backwards right now. Does that make any sense? We don't try to keep a running total, but we ask the user if they have accumulated up to the, if they're up to or matching the exclusion for the whole year. So in terms of inputs, this is the change.
Yeah, so basically what this would just do is just keep track of what's been used based on the inputs and then subtract it from the remaining balance. So we would just have the ability within WorkWorld to keep track of how much the client has left for the year.
So, Mike, this is David. That also implies then that we are going to have potentially a WISA going back into a case, perhaps even monthly, for 6 to 8 months. Correct?
Possibly. And if the student is eligible for the SEIE and it hasn't been used, it is possible for the WISA to go back and have the SEIE applied retroactively. So you might have a case where the WISA would go back maybe 3-4 months, calculate how much of their wages should have been excluded.
Okay, I see.
And then be able to put it in.
Where it's in a way we're adding something in that creates a different user action.
Yeah, it's kind of just like a tracking tool of what they've used already and what they have left.
Does this have to be synced in some way with the date of the scenario? So it lines up. I had to go back 2 years on one of them one time. Obviously, we only get 5 scenarios, but if you're trying to show what's happening on a particular date, you put in a scenario and a date for that scenario. I'm just curious how this would interact with that.
Maybe that's partly why we've gone back and forth about if this needs to be its own piece, kind of separate from the scenarios. Although I think it makes sense to have it in there, and maybe part of what we do is, Mike, part of what we do when this is deployed is actually talk about and create a training on, I see this as there are two ways you could use this tool once it's done in helping with a potential overpayment or retroactively getting this applied, in which case you would have all that data to put in. And in the other, if a student does qualify, you could put in one scenario that showed maybe 3 months of potential earnings and what it would do. I don't know if it would make sense to forecast out how someone would use an entire SEIE period, but maybe we do, for demonstration's sake, show how someone would use a good portion of it, or how it, how that would work and what it would look like.
Mm-hmm.
Does
And of
that
course,
make sense?
it would still be part of the actual work or report that goes with it. There would be a section on
Exactly.
SEIE and say, you've used 3,000, you have so much left.
Because
Exactly.
right now it looks like a horse of a different color to me. There's a lot of things that we're changing that don't fall into the construct that we're currently using. So it seems it's a bigger change than I was first envisioning. You know what I mean? Or it's going to be. You know what I mean? I because the months we do so much with the monthly numbers. You know what I mean? In terms of FBR and things like that, that the calculations would be totally messed up, because especially you're talking about a span of time that's longer than a month. 3 months or 4 months or 5 months. I mean, it's just kind of blowing my mind with what it would take to calculate it that way.
Well, and I think that's why we would almost, that maybe makes it make even more sense that it's its own standalone page, and it would just be if somebody qualified, I could see using a detailed output scenario of just that situation. Here's what the SEIE would look like. And so you wouldn't have to do everything else for that. Like it could be separate, because it would be more detailed.
It could be a support document for the SEIE itself when you're,
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going, Sherman.
Yeah, because I think that WorkWorld already, if you input the monthly figures, it already calculates it. So maybe we could just say, have a tip in there that there is a worksheet available for calculating. We could even have multiple years, worksheets for different years for people who have to go back a ways or whatever. You just say there are tools available to calculate,
and that
kind of thing.
Yeah, and that actually fits with one of the things we want to add, which are kind of page counters, because part of what we want to start figuring out is how to grow the use of certain things. And if it's its own, if we have a kind of pointer to here's where you go to do these calculations, we'll also have an idea of how often it's really discussed and how often.
Yeah,
So
I know that.
I love that.
This is very much in line with the worksheet that I sent in about the Medicare Savings Program, and we use that on every single SSI report we do, pretty much, to calculate all the different levels. So this is kind of very much along that line of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because Sherman's buy-in, it seems like it's all strictly sort of monthly based, so it's more amenable to WorkWorld than something like my understanding what we're doing with the past now, where it's sort of a cumulative thing.
One more thing that I hadn't thought of though, but Sherman brought up, and it makes sense. We are gonna want probably, I don't know how many different years we're gonna want to have available at any time, but we should have it so that if someone needs to retroactively go back 2 years because we've authorized an overpayment and they were a student, we should have it so that you can start by saying, I need to work an SEIE case for 2015, and it automatically have those rates and numbers, or 16 or 17. And one question I now have is, realistically, how many years and numbers should be available? Is 2 years enough? Are there cases we get where someone's missed it for 3 and we're going back and trying to get that corrected?
I did one for somebody who had worked 3 years and 2 or 3 years in high school, and they didn't exclude the earnings. And I went back and was able to get that like $2,500 back for them, which was huge for them. So I think the most I've done is like for 2 or 3 years. Because after that, certainly it's the working age, right? So we're not doing it for people who are past 22, and they don't typically work until they're 15 or 16. So yeah, we could. I don't think it's that hard to change the formula. We could just save some, go back, keep 4 or 5 years in the hopper, and people can use the appropriate tool for the year they're working on.
Okay.
And some years the amounts didn't even some years the amounts didn't even change. Like I think 15 and 16 were the same amounts.
Good point. Okay,
right. That's right.
So probably we would though want to have at any time a 5-year span of where you can plug in a calendar year if someone needed to go back. And actually, it makes more sense, especially with the big push for pre-ets. I believe we could potentially see a lot of our counselors wanting to use just this tool with a client who is 16, 17, 18. In fact, this tool is going to lend itself to some of the other work we're doing across the agency, and having this within the system and as something that can be pulled out separate is actually a very powerful thing given the nature of the changes the agency has to go through around pre-admission services. I hadn't really connected those until just now, but it's actually very timely.
Mike, what do you think on line 17 about having totals across? So if you're actually pulling this up and using this with a client to illustrate the benefit of, say you have somebody who's like pre-S, or in that case, it wouldn't really technically be pre-S because if they're working and earning something, it would be a category. But you can illustrate about how if you're considering going to work during the summer break, that this is how it would, this is what it would look like given, once we get this work incentive in place, and we can have a total down at the bottom that totals the gross wages for the summer or the semester or whatever. Say this is how much you brought in on your check, and then go over a couple columns and say this is how much Social Security counted of all that. So it would be a nice sales feature to compare those two and kind of emphasize the benefits of this.
Yeah, and on this sheet it's not working that way, but ideally the totals would be carried down and deducted from the remaining balance. So what we would have in WorkWorld would be able to calculate that. It just wasn't working well on this sheet.
But on this sheet, you total up the income exclusions used today, but I'm just suggesting that as a comparison, we calculation of how much they actually did earn. So we can say, you earned $5,000, but Social Security only counted, well, in that case, they wouldn't count any of it. But, it would just be a nice way to illustrate it. I just find any kind of visuals like this that you can show people, it just helps, it helps some people understand it better.
Sure.
And then, Sherman, I don't know how to be, but the other piece I'd like to see with that, if possible, is a tip around asset development and something around how that could be put in a pass, or that could be put in ITA for higher ed, or some kind of other tip around how that could be used to better someone's position or create a resource they might not have had to get that next level job. And I know we get stuck on the savings, the resource limit, but it'd be nice to have to leverage this to create a stronger asset later through a pass or IPA. So just a thought.
I know I've been messing around with spreadsheets a lot recently, and if you had a column there for age, I know, David, you remember we had a client who was using student income exclusion, and he went out and bought a car, and he started living his life assuming that he would continue to have this added income. And so if we just had a column that you plug in the age, if it and have if it's up to 22 or more, that the calculations don't apply, and that would be very helpful, I think, because it wouldn't always apply if somebody turns 22 during this calendar year. It's not going to apply.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely.
It'd be an easy, Excel formula to it applies, it doesn't apply. So.
I like that a lot, Sherman.
Yep, that's a good idea.
And yes,
he dug himself a big hole.
And part of the goal, that's part of where I was going with the tips around some asset development, financial literacy pieces is, right. This is the perfect place to tie back into some other initiatives we're working on. But again, we don't want to see someone start living large only to then realize they are about to have half of what they did have.
Yeah. And
the other reason is suddenly it makes it some people will perceive that as, oh, why did I go to work in the first place? And better to have someone prepared for that normal, rational change than be surprised, have a negative outcome, and then decide work wasn't worth it.
Yeah. So I remember the spreadsheet I did for him tried to show, okay, this is how it's going now. This is what's going to happen when you turn 22, and the figures again, and you need to for that. Well, maybe explained it better, but I think you and I use that in a presentation time. So I think we're trying to use these work incentives to help people plan realistically.
Yeah, and again, this is one of those people have been very interested and discussed at the level of detail. So part of my hopes is once this goes live, we will create a couple trainings and more counselors, especially folks working again with the transition age, will not only use it, but I really could see this being one of the pieces that a counselor might individually actually pull out work world, use that school.
Yeah, I like the tool. All about it.
Okay, and this is just like like I said, a general idea of what it might look like. Sherman, I like your idea about adding the age column. I think we could definitely put that in. So we can have further discussions around this. Um, does anybody else have anything to add?
Okay.
Um, Otherwise, we can just go on to the pass.
Oh, excuse me. I wasn't clear if we decided that this would be based on particular scenarios or if it would be separate from scenarios.
Well, ideally, this
I
would
think
be a separate
we're leaning towards
standalone.
separate.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Maybe a reference to it in
Yeah.
World with a fit.
Aaron, I think what we were talking about, and maybe we didn't officially decide this, but if Work World already screens to see if this is something someone is eligible, and when that comes up, there'd be a note or a link or a marker to say, to work up a student earned income exclusion, click here, and it would take you to a separate page. So it could almost be like an extension.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on this? All right.
Nope.
So let me just pull up the past feasibility questionnaire, and I've sent this out to you guys before, so you're probably familiar with this. But this is something that I used when I was doing direct services. I found it really helpful. It kind of encompasses all the questions that a WISA would ask when screening for a potential pass for somebody. And we're in pretty good shape in terms of WorkWorld because a lot of the information that's gathered on a form like this, WorkWorld already asks. So, like for example, we know what kind of income they're going to be putting in the pass. We know if they're on SSDI or if they have unearned income or wages or what have you. Monthly living expenses will have all that information because of the incorporation of the budget module. We can gather all that. Um, Where I think a separate module would be helpful is under the section that asks about list the items or services you need to achieve your vocational goal. That's not something that WorkWorld currently asks, but it would be helpful to have like a separate standalone module where people could enter the things that they've received from VR or another agency that could help them with their goal, but also a section where they can enter the services or items that they still need and the cost of those items. So, like for example, if they were writing a pass to purchase a vehicle to get back and forth to work, they could list that expense and the cost in a separate module. Um, and if a person is writing a pass, Social Security technically asks them to get at least 3 estimates for whatever the expenses are. So if they needed something like a computer or a car or whatever, they would have a breakdown of what they would need and what the anticipated expenses were going to be. There are some questions in here that WorkWorld doesn't ask that I think would be helpful to add. For example, do you have an open case with DARS or DBVI, yes or no? Does your counselor support the goal? That's an important one to know. I find that Social Security is much more likely to be on board with client's vocational goal if it has the support of the VR counselor.
Mike, this is David. One other thing I'd like to add before
Yeah.
you go on, because I think we want to make sure this is available. If we're going to ask if they have a current VR or BBVI open case, I think we also add to there, or is your ticket currently assigned to an employment network? And I say that because part of our goal is that groups like the Choice Group or DidLake are also using this tool for their separate ticket-only clients.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make sure that that stays clear and that stays as something we could point to as how our system is built to help anyone in Virginia, regardless of whether or not we as the state agency are supporting the client. And then the other thing I think it would be great to add right there, when you went to the question about do you have everything you need for your career goal, I think it would be great and really important actually for us to word that in a way where we're asking, do you have everything you need for your current goal, or is there something you need to get to the next level of your career ladder? Because in a way, this is going to be one of those perfect tools to show how WorkWorld can be used to help someone get from job A to job B. And I think we can illustrate that with kind of asking a broader question there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, there should be both a section for like what services have you already received that would help you achieve your goal, and then what services do you need that you don't yet have, and what are the costs of those items. So I think we should have both of those in there. Any other funding sources provided, and that WorkWorld really doesn't ask that, but that would be more like, do people have, if they don't have any other income other than SSI, do they have maybe a resource that they could set aside on the amount? And then we should also ask questions, and this is what WorkWorld doesn't do, is if they've had a prior pass submitted or approved or completed before. That's important because even if the client has what looks like a feasible goal, if they have a history of starting a pass and not following through, Social Security is much less likely to approve a pass. The client has a history of not following through before. So it's kind of important for us to know when screening for a pass whether or not a client has had a successful pass in the past. And then disposable income before pass submission and after pass approval, that can all be done in the budget module. And I would assume that the client could then do a side-by-side. It's like, look, this is how much you had coming in after your expenses before the pass approval. And with the pass, if you send aside maybe $500 a month, your budget would look like this. So I think the last one can be done in the budget module. So really, we're looking at adding questions about, do you have an open case with VR or an assigned ticket? Does VR support the goal? What items or services do you still need to reach the goal? And have you completed a pass before? So there are some questions that we do need to add, but I think a lot of the information that we need is already there. So thoughts on that?
I'm not quite sure how we would do the list of service items unless we did another kind of budget page where they would have the entry for that. Is that what we're thinking?
That's kind of where I was thinking about it. It's like another standalone where they could enter the items or services they still need, and then a cost. And I wouldn't want to put it in the existing budget tool because it's not a cost they've incurred already, but it's a cost that they're going to be saving for a future goal. So I think it should be separate from like a budget module.
That makes me want to create a whole new module as opposed to trying to blend the two and some be mixed. You know what I mean? For some of these questions, we could bury within, the current list of questions. But when I see questions like this in terms of expected things, I agree with you. I don't think we want to mix them.
No, because there's going to be costs that they're specifically saving, the past funds for that they've not already incurred. So if you blend it in with the budget, that would get way too confusing, and it would make the budget kind of inaccurate. But again, whether or not we have the ability to do this is going to depend on, how much funding is available and how many manpower hours we've got and all that stuff, of course.
Like you run into many situations where somebody is getting SSDI, and by considering a pass is kind of tries to do a pass and SSI eligibility at the same time. It makes my brain hurt, but it's been explained to me. I've never actually used it. You know what I mean there?
Sure, like if they're not on SSI because they're over the SSI threshold, but if they put the money aside, they're over the threshold
Yeah.
and pass, they can become SSI eligible. That would require just establishing the pass, making contact with Social Security and saying, I'm, in the process of establishing a pass, I'm going to put X amount of dollars aside and I need to apply for SSI. So I always used to tell people, like, if you're not on SSI already, but you know that you're going to put enough aside to become SSI eligible, start the SSI application process as soon as possible and let Social Security know that you're going to be submitting a pass to go along with that.
So
So yeah, if
would
a
that
client's not on
process
SSI already, they need to apply as soon as possible.
Yeah. So I guess would that process need to be referenced in some fashion on this worksheet?
Yeah, and actually it is part of the questionnaire. I don't think I covered it, but it does say that um, at the top someplace. Yeah,
Yeah,
current
no,
SSI recipient,
SSI
yes or no.
application ASAP. Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be
Yeah.
something that we would know. Work will already ask if you're getting SSI, and so if the
Right.
client answers no, we could maybe do a tip or something that says, if you're not on SSI and you're considering a pass, file an SSI application as soon as possible. Something along those lines.
If you're in the SSDI mode on WorkWorld, it doesn't ask about a pass plan, I don't think, does it?
I don't think it's set up to do that, but that's something that we need to take a look at because quite often, people that are on SSDI are the most feasible pass candidates. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I guess that would require going into the workbook and looking at the appearance rules for the past questions and seeing how we could amend those.
So it smells right now that it was almost like you go back to a case and you, instead of saying, open this case, say it's almost like start a past plan using the following, case or scenario. And then additional questions would come up, and then and it'll be different outputs. Does that sound? Is that what you're looking at, Mike? You think?
Yeah, exactly.
So it'll be a different module, but we might be able to copy over some of the answers we have already, and then we can decide where we would want to add these additional past questions, either in the new section or in the old one.
Right.
All right, thanks.
Any other thoughts on this one? Anything else that's missing on it that anybody would think that would be relevant to add to our module or anything?
Nope. I'm having a brain blip on what VESID is.
I'm sorry, what was that?
VESID in front of Vocational Rehab Agency.
Oh, that stands for VESID. I used this when I was up in New York. That was the name of the
Oh,
vocational rehab agency.
oh, okay.
Yeah, that doesn't apply to us. This is something that the WIPA project that I used to work under up there in New York developed to kind of help the WIPA screen for pass, and they gave me permission to use it. So I always found it extremely helpful when I was in direct services.
Okay.
Does Aaron have what he needs to move forward, or what is he expecting from us?
Well, I mean, I think we need to take a pass at the visual design of this to make sure that we understand how it will sit within the SEIE. That sounds like that's going to be pretty straightforward. I'm a little bit less clear on pass. But I mean, I think the forms themselves are pretty straightforward, and if they're both going to be independent, then it's not too complicated. But we need to do a little visual design around that, and I would want to have somebody review that.
Mike and David, what does Marilyn use for path?
Go ahead, David. I mean, I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. If they have something similar to this,
What does the state of Maryland use? Okay, it's just a questionnaire, is it?
Yeah, I actually don't remember what I don't know that they sent us a separate pass calculator.
yeah, I don't remember seeing that either.
They did have their separate calculations for HUD and SNAP, but I don't believe they had one for
pass.
Okay.
Or I don't think they
Just
had
wondering.
SEIE either, did they?
No, I'm looking right now and I don't see a separate document.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess, Aaron, if you can kind of maybe put together a mock-up based on these two documents, then I can kind of look them over and give you feedback. Do you think you have enough information just looking at these and based on the call today to be able to do that, or?
I think we do, yeah.
Okay. Well, if you have any other questions as you're developing those, just let me know.
Okay, will do.
Thank you, Mike, for putting this together.
Sure, not a problem. Glad to do it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. So when was our next core meeting?
I think it's in December because of the holiday, but it's at a funny time. Let me check again. I was just on the calendar yesterday.
I have December 8th as the next one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should we?
So then
I know
it's the 29th that is iffy for everybody, I'm sure, but the 8th we should be able to make.
Okay, because I know that Thanksgiving's coming up, and next week's Veterans Day. I was going to ask if once we have the mock-ups, should we get together again and discuss those, or is that necessary?
We certainly could have, if he has it ready ahead of time, we could take a peek.
Okay.
I would expect we'll have those ready before December 8th, certainly. So as soon as we have them, I'll send them to you, Mike. And then if we're on the right page, headed in the right direction at least, then I think a meeting with everyone would be great.
Okay, well, that sounds great.
Can I get a
Thank
sneak
you.
peek as well?
Sure, of course.
Thanks.
All right, well, have a good day, everybody.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.